should be good. So anyway, thank y'all for joining me this evening. As you can see in the title, we are going to be discussing Brandon Tatum's recent Jubilee surrounded debate that I think he did a really good job on. Okay, I'm saying in the comment section that it sounds good, so we'll just go with it. So, yeah, Jubilee debate. Apparently, these are very popular these days. And Brandon Tatum is one of the more recent people, and he's the latest person who did this surrounded debate, surrounded by 20 so-called black liberals, and it was fascinating because all of the talking points coming from the so-called black liberals were predictable. They come from a Marxist school of thought, which we'll get to here in a moment. And quite frankly, folks, I'm tired of talking about Marxism. I really am. And I wonder if you guys are just as tired of hearing about it as I am of talking about it. The problem is that it's inescapable insofar that it is present in many of the talking points that are made in this debate, but it's present all around. And that's, there's a reason for that. There's a reason why this Marxist idea, this Marxist framework, this Marxist worldview is so present in our world. And it tyrannically dictates the parameters for conversations and for discourse. And this recent debate with Brandon and these 20 so-called liberals, black liberals, is no exception to that. Of course, Marxism, as I point out often, has had a very pervasive impact on the Western world and has been able to bloom by way of many Western institutions, including the church, unfortunately. Right? We see it, of course, in academia. We see it in primary, secondary education. We see it in entertainment. We see it in the press. We see it when it comes to a lot of the career politicians and policymakers and bureaucrats. We see it all over the place. And so it's difficult to have these kind of conversations without talking about Marxism, because talking about Marxism is tantamount to naming the thing. And this is one of the, I'm not a skilled debater by any stretch of the imagination. I will never claim to be. But one thing that I know is necessary is to name the thing, right? Which Brandon did in this debate, thankfully. It's important to name the thing. What do you mean by that, Chad? Well, what I mean by naming the thing is when it comes to this kind of Marxian worldview and all of the sophisticated ways in which it's discussed and talked about. And when I say sophisticated, what I mean by that is purveyors of the Marxist worldview can put forth an idea and articulate an idea without calling it Marxism, without calling it communism, without calling it socialism in many respects. They're just articulating what they believe to be the end goal of their vision. A community where there's equality or equity and the rich are paying their fair share and X, Y, and Z. They can lay out the not the groundwork, but the kind of, fruity details of what it is they're advocating for and why those who stand against what it is they're advocating for are amoral, are prejudiced or bigoted or racist or whatever the case may be. And they can talk about it in a very sophisticated way without ever naming the thing. And so it's important to name the thing, irrespective of how skilled you are at debating. It takes nothing more than a casual observer who knows history, who knows, the facts of what has actually transpired historically and what's happening right now before our very eyes, to actually say, well, you're saying this, but here's what you're actually saying, to actually name the thing. That to me, I think, is vital when it comes to having these kinds of conversations, engaging in these kind of discussions, and engaging in these kind of debates. Listen to their highfalutin nonsense, their sophisticated articulation of a Marxist worldview without ever calling it Marxism. Listen to it and just name the thing. That's really all it takes. Right? And one of the things, too, that you'll acknowledge about these 20 debaters, one of the things that you'll acknowledge about their ilk or their contingent is that many of them are, like, they consider themselves highbrow intellectuals. Many of them are college educated, which only means that they are voluntarily indoctrinated with this Marxist worldview. And of course, they hear skewed facts and figures by their ideological professors that they retain and keep trapped in their mind for such a time as this, to have the debate, to push their agenda. And so when they're sitting there talking, to many, it might seem like, oh man, these people are with it. They know their stuff. They know the facts. They know the details. And the picture they paint of the past is so devastating that we need to do something about this immediately. And this is how they weaponize revisionist history, right? But understand, all they're doing is regurgitating what they've heard from their professors, what they've read in their Marxist Howard Zinn-esque textbooks. That's literally all they're doing. They're not coming to you with any original thought, right? And then to the extent that you try to present the truth to them, they pretend that it's not the truth, and they find some way to obfuscate it, to downplay it, to tiptoe around it. You'll see that a lot, too, in this debate. And we're going to be covering some of the things that I believe to be key moments in the debate. I'm not going to be able to get to all the key moments because we won't have time to do that. But I do have some things that I want to show you and respond to. Right. So, with that being said, and what were your guys' thoughts on the debate, for those of you who've seen it? It was released today. I know Jubilee releases their surrounded debates on Sundays. What were your guys' thoughts on the debate, if you've watched it? I know some of you maybe have seen clips of it online, on social media, but what were your guys' thoughts on it, if you've watched it? Hello, Barbara Hill over on Facebook. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Hello, Clyde Frog 440. Thank you for joining us over on YouTube. I appreciate you being here. It says pick your favorite moments. Yeah, well, I have plenty of them, so we're going to get into those. Hello, oh really? Good to see you in the chat. One of our moderators said it was annoying. I thought so too. It was very irritating. And I've been in debate situations before where the person sitting across from you is lying and saying, trying to talk rapid fire and packing so many lies into that rapid fire diatribe that you have to make a decision as to which of the lies you'll address, because there's a constant talking over you and things of this nature, and it's not a real conversation. Because for one, the person sitting across from you is not coming in good faith. They're not coming to seek understanding. They're not coming to lay out an argument that hasn't been heard before, that they might then have that argument go through the refinery of cross-examination and scrutiny by the other side to see if it still holds up. They're not interested in that at all, right? I mean, when I debated the funny-looking guy out of Atlanta, who tries to sound like Martin Luther King often, I forget his name, but when I debated him on Sean Kelly's podcast, you had a lot of that, quite frankly. I mean, here's somebody who considers himself to be a Republican, but then he says, well, I'm not a Republican. He calls himself a Christian populist. Like, what? Okay. And he's constantly changing his political identity by the week. Right? But when I was talking to him, again, he's well rehearsed. He's spitting out a lot of things that just aren't true. that aren't true, and you try to correct them. And of course, I'm using my time to try to articulate the narrative that King was not a genuine pastor. He was not a genuine Christian. He was, in fact, a Marxist, and he was a deceitful one at that. And I'm understanding. I'm going into the debate understanding that most people haven't heard that. Most people haven't heard that view articulated. So I want to articulate those points, see if Austin has a substantive rebuttal. Yeah, Austin is his name. See if Austin has a substantive rebuttal. And if he brings up a fact that I did not know, or if he brings up something else that detracts from the point that I made, or what have you, let's have a discussion about that. But of course, after the debate was over and it was left up to the public to decide what they heard, and most of the people in the comments were in my favor, it was probably about 80-20, 80 in my favor, 20 in his. He proceeds to go around the internet street saying that he won the debate. And I'm not claiming that I won anything at all, right? I'll leave that up to you all to decide whether I did an okay job, a sufficient job in articulating the point, or bringing information to bear that you may have not heard before. And to decide and to make the same kind of decision based on what he brought to the table. That's up to you to decide. But I'm not the Holy Spirit. I'm not going to, by my intelligence and merit, change your mind. These are questions that you have to grapple with within yourself. And you have to apply discernment to what you're hearing. Because it's you who have to stand before God on Judgment Day. Not me on your behalf, not the other guy on your behalf. It's you. And you can listen to every debate that's available to you on social media and on YouTube. And you can, pump your fists and celebrate when somebody who agrees with your worldview says a thing you like. And you can scowl and cringe and all the things when the person on the other side says something you don't. But that's not a measure stick for truth. I acknowledge that, even for people who agree with me. And that's why I say, at the end of the day, I can present the information, but it's up to you to discern the information. And if need be, go and fact check the information. Because if you're genuinely in search for truth, which is a noble thing, then really be in search for truth. And understand that the truth is not going to be found in politics. It's not going to be found in debate even. The truth is found at the cross. And that's why I make the documentaries I make. That's why I come on this podcast and do this show. That's why I go and engage in these conversations with people. Because the history that's presented to us is weaponized to get us to follow a path that leads to our destruction. The destruction of our bodies, the destruction of our minds, and the destruction of our souls. That's blackness, right? That's what blackness is. When you look at the political kind of undergird of what we call blackness today, and we're going to discuss this in The Myth of Blackness, the documentary that I'm working on. The objective is to get you to join the revolution. That's always been the objective of blackness, to get you to join the revolution. We're going to articulate this. This isn't speculation. This is well-documented fact. Right? And so I need to point that out to you. That when it comes to identity politics, when it comes to the kind of glorification of social justice movements of old, be it feminism, civil rights, LGBT rights, all the things. The objective was never to bring about genuine liberty. The objective was to get you to join the revolution. And nobody can define what the revolution is. They just know there needs to be a revolution. Which leads to chaos, which leads to catastrophe, which leads to all the things, which leads to your detriment, the detriment of you and the detriment of your community. You understand? So whether it was the debate with him or the debate with Delano Squires, again, my approach was to bring understanding where there isn't understanding, at least not on a wide scale. It wasn't to own Delano Squires. It wasn't to prove that I was more intelligent than him. It wasn't to make a name for myself. It was to have a genuine conversation and to bring facts to bear that perhaps Delano has not heard before. And unfortunately, he wasn't that receiving. And people could argue that I wasn't receiving of what he was arguing as well. But the fact of the matter is, the difference is that the points that Delano were making, I heard before and I researched. You understand? Same with the guy before him. I heard these arguments before and I've researched them. And the counter narrative or the counter argument that I was offering was to say, hey, here's the fact. Here's the history of this fact. Do with it what you will. And had they provided information I hadn't heard before, then I would either concede if they can bring the receipts or what have you and make it plain, make it clear, or I can say, well, that, something sounds off about that. Admittedly, I don't know about that, but let me go and research that point. That's the proper response. And Brandon actually had at least one example of that, where he admitted, yeah, I hadn't read that book, which I think was a noble thing for him to do. And we'll get to that in a moment. I'm just kind of laying the groundwork. But admitting where you hadn't looked into a certain thing. And then making it a point to go and look at that thing to see if what they were arguing was actually true or whether they were arguing in bad faith to do a gotcha. And 9.5 times out of 10, it's the latter. You understand? So I wanted to play clip number 1 because I really need to get moving if I want to play all these clips for you all tonight. And there's a chance that I might not be able to get to all of them. But we're going to start off with clip number 1, and we're going to talk about it. So let's see here. So I hope everybody's doing well tonight. I know I am. Let's get into it.
My first surrounded claim is Trump and Republicans are better for the black community than Democrats.
Before I do my rebuttal, I would just like to know why you think that.
Well, there's a myriad of reasons. I think that conservative policies are more beneficial to the black community. It's more beneficial to America, which black people are part of America. And I think that policies like limiting immigration or illegal immigration, getting illegal immigrants out of this country, lowering taxes, all benefit black people as a whole. Religious freedom, you name it, every single policy that I can think about that Republicans have implemented, that they stand for, the values they stand for are all better off for black people than Democrats could ever dream of.
Okay. So you heard the claim that Republicans are better for the so-called black community than the Democrats are. And Brandon, because at first when he made the claim, I thought to myself, that's not a claim that I would make. Because as somebody who researches history, I find that the Republicans are as complicit, and I'm speaking generally, as complicit in the downfall of America as the Democrats. Of course, the Democrats have fast-tracked it, whereas the Republicans, by way of weakness, spinelessness, of refusal to be as proactive during the Cold War as they should have been, a refusal to support Joe McCarthy all the way like they should have done, a refusal to support Barry Goldwater during the 1964 election like they should have done. They've always been on the fence. But then Brandon does something interesting. He talks about conservative policies, and he proceeds also to talk about how conservative policies, which are meant to be American policies, which are meant to basically protect, defend, preserve the prosperity and the posterity and the dignity of the United States of America, is something that benefits not only so-called white people, but also colored people as well. That's a general argument he was making, and to that I agree with. But one of the things that I couldn't do is kind of box myself into the corner of having to defend the Republican Party when I know full well that, like, my agenda as it pertains to my civic duty in these United States of America is to preserve the sovereignty of the state of Texas, first and foremost, and then by extension, the nation state of America, the dignity of America. That's the way I see it. And the question is, which party is better at doing that than the other? And I think a case can be made that the Republican Party has done a bit of a better job, but they have a lot to answer for as well. So essentially, we're talking about two different things, because the question comes down to colored people and which party has done better by colored people, which I think is a trap in itself. Because the question for me becomes, well, what makes colored people different than anyone else in such a way that they need policies specifically catered to them that one can decide upon in terms of those policies working more to their benefit or more to their detriment? I think it's a trap question, because I argue that colored people don't need special privileges. They don't need special policies. They don't. They never did. And sure, people, some people would disagree with that. And I'm open to having that conversation. But I think to the extent that you try to affect a certain outcome through policies, you're creating muddy waters. You're creating a slippery slope. You're creating a system whereby other groups can come and say, look, we're put upon too. We're oppressed too. We need special privileges too. We need special rejiggering of laws too. And suddenly the government finds itself being a kind of referee in determining who is and who isn't marginalized and put upon, and thereby needs certain special privileges and policies to benefit them, which is one of the things we're going to get to here in a moment, because that in a roundabout way came up in this debate as well. In fact, I think it's probably the next clip or two that I'm about to play. But the reality is that the government was never meant to be your dad. It was never meant to be your nanny. It just wasn't. That's not the purpose of the government, but it is in fact the interpretation of the government's role, which was popularized by the Marxist worldview. And unfortunately, many Republicans have adopted that worldview unknowingly, to where the question becomes, well, which party is better for this marginalized group or that marginalized group? And in such a framework, the Republican Party is then forced to try to compete with the Democrats and saying, look over here, our policies for X marginalized group is better than their policies for X marginalized group. Now, of course, that's not the argument that Brandon was making, because he said with his own words that he believes that pro-America policies affect or benefit not just so-called white people, but also colored people as well. And again, I agree with that. I'm not taking anything away from Brandon's argument. I'm just saying it's much more difficult to try to, crawl yourself out of the web when you're defending which party is better for X or Y group. Because, basically, not to further convolute things, but I disagree with the premise that something should be done for X or Y group from a policy perspective. You track with that? Let me know if y'all track with that. I'm looking at the comment section right now. Let me know if that makes sense to you all. All right, I see somebody said that is true. Okay. I'm not looking for y'all to agree with me. I'm just asking if that makes sense. Okay. Alrighty, so let's move on. All right, somebody said I track with that, finally. I don't know if my comments are just delayed coming in or what. So let us move on. Let us move on.
I just want to focus on which one of Trump's policies specifically has been designed to help the Black community.
Well, First Step Act has been designed to reverse the effects of over-policing from the past.
He has done that.
The First Step Act, yes, it was.
Okay.
To allow for people who were incarcerated with sentencing for drug dealing
Right.
and less violent crimes for them to have some relief. My uncle got out on the First Step Act.
Okay.
Urban revitalization,
Yeah.
injecting money into these inner city communities. Permanent funding for HBCUs, which Barack Obama never did. Donald Trump implemented.
Okay.
I mean, I can go down the list.
Yeah,
and
so
and I
we-
think that
we-
lowering taxes and all the other benefits that Americans get
Yeah.
is also beneficial to Black
So
people.
it's funny because I've watched some of your videos, I've heard these talking points before, and I actually looked into all of these, and there's not a ton of quantitative impact on how those have actually affected just the Black community.
Okay, so you see what she did there? Do you see what she did there toward the end, right? And again, this is why this is a trap. Because they have it in their mind that they are the ones who set the standard for what is and what isn't considered a positive policy for so-called Black people. And so, of course, when they make the standard, what Trump is doing or what the Republicans are doing doesn't quite meet the standard, because their standard is Marxism. Like, their standard is full-fledged Marxism. And unless and until Trump renounces the idea of America being a sovereign nation state, to the extent that, you know, Trump renounces anything that smacks of so-called conservatism, and to the extent that Trump acknowledges that Marx was right, Lenin was right, we should push for a revolution, a redistribution of wealth and a redistribution of power. We should, you know, put Marxists in charge of every arm of government. Unless and until Trump does that, he's not doing anything for so-called Black people. Like, because that's the standard that they're setting. And so my point, to take it back to the point I tried to make earlier, is that it's not even worth trying. It's not even worth getting into bed with the notion that something should be done from a federal government perspective, or federal government from the power of the federal government for this or that group. Because to the extent that you make that concession by virtue of announcing the pushing of policies, or I have a Trump version of policies that are meant to serve this or that group, sure, you might have so-called Black Republicans who celebrate that and say, see, look, our guy's also doing something for so-called Black people. It creates a situation where, in a roundabout way, the role of authoritativeness falls into the lap of those who have been arguing from the beginning that something needs to be done for X or Y group, namely the Marxists. So we shouldn't give them any concession at all. But again, I think Brandon held his ground very well, and I'm not going to take anything from him. But that's, you know, that once again is a web that's very difficult to try to climb out of once you concede that something needs to be done for X or Y group. You understand? So I'm curious to see what the woman with the little ring in her nose and the bow in her hair and the dreads, I'm curious to see where she goes with this argument. And of course I know where she goes, but there's something I want to point out to you, because I made the claim that she's arguing from a Marxist framework. So I had better follow my own rule and substantiate my point, right? I had better do that. If I'm going to apply that standard to others, I need to have it applied to me as well, which I'm going to do. You can't just go around calling people Marxists or saying that they're peddling Marxist rhetoric without substantiating your claim. So allow me to try to flesh that out. But before I do, let me play this next clip for you from the debate.
So how are you correct in that Democrat policies are better than Republican
Well,
policies?
actually, do you want to know my personal belief is that the Democrats are fundamentally kind of apathetic to the needs of black people, while Republicans are openly antagonizing the black community.
Give me an example.
So, I mean, so
what
an
policy
example,
position is negative towards black people that Republicans implement?
Trump this year intentionally got rid of the disparate impact analysis. So what the disparate impact analysis does is that it analyzes laws that were made neutrally, policies that were intended to be neutral, to make sure that there were not any racial disparities as an effect of that policy, right? Accidentally. So Trump has removed the protection for the disparate impact analysis. So we don't know if the policies that we're enacting are disproportionately hurting the black community or not.
Okay, so disparate impact analyses. Disparate impact analysis. Does anybody know where that notion came from? Anyone? Does anybody know where that came from? I'll give you a hint. Think of the woke authors who became prominent in 2020 during the George Floyd situation. Does that hint ring anybody's bell? I see a bunch of nopes in the comment section. I'll give you another hint. His real name is Henry Rogers. His birth name is Henry Rogers, Hank Rogers. Somebody said I can't remember. Okay. So Hank Rogers, yep, somebody got it. Maureen got it. Kendi, Ibram X. Kendi. He changed his name to Ibram X. Kendi. He's born Hank Rogers. But anyway, so Hank Rogers, a.k.a. Ibram X. Kendi, he writes a book in 2019 called How to Be an Anti-Racist. Do y'all remember that book? All of the news programs were talking about it in 2019 or in 2020 during the George Floyd situation. And then the following year, he writes a book in 2020. So 2019, he writes How to Be an Anti-Racist. And then in 2020, he writes a book called Stamped. Now, Kendi was arguing for what would eventually become the Disparate Impact Analysis Committee, which is supposed to basically analyze policies, not just on the federal level, but at the state level as well, to determine what would be the impact on, communities of color. Not only to look at policies that are currently on the docket, but to retroactively look at policies in the past to determine what effect did it have on so-called people of color relative to white people, and use that as a determining factor to decide what reparations could possibly look like. Now, Ibram X. Kendi is a self-avowed Marxist. And here she is. I don't know the woman's name. I think it's Naima, something like that. Here she is arguing. So she gives no context or pretext to what the disparate impact analysis is at all. She just brings it up as though it's this kind of unquestioned, automatic moral yardstick, measuring stick of what is fair versus what is unfair. That it automatically holds a role of moral authority. And it's something that's as old as time. It's an established kind of benchmark in American jurisprudence and American government. And it's something that should be here to stay. And the fact that Trump would get rid of it is a blow to civilization. That's how she's arguing for this thing, not realizing that this is something that came about during the Biden administration after Reconstruction 3.0, aka George Floyd's Summer of Love. You understand? Now I want to give you a insight into who Ibram X. Kendi is, lest you forget. So again, this idea of a disparate impact analysis is the birth child of a self-avowed Marxist. This isn't pejorative. This isn't speculation. This isn't, me just kind of talking smack. I'm going to give you, again, substance to what it is I'm talking about. So let's take a look at Ibram X. Kendi, birth name Hank Rogers. All right. So this is who I'm talking about.
You can't separate capitalism from racism. They emerged during the same period, and they have long thrived together. But you can't really challenge one effectively without challenging the other. You can't truly be anti-racist if you're not being anti-capitalist.
All right. I mean, need I show more? Need I say more? In his books, Stamped and How to Be an Anti-Racist, he's arguing for the distribution of income, distribution of wealth. He's arguing for all of the ideas, the visions, the policies laid out by Karl Marx and Lenin themselves. He spends 300 or more pages doing it. Again, this is a very sophisticated way of saying, I'm a Marxist and I think Marxist policies are great. And a sitting president of the United States adopted the brainchild of a self-avowed Marxist. That should be concerning to you. But not to Naima. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name right. She believes that it should be an unquestioned measuring stick that deserves an embedded and enshrined place in American jurisprudence, in American policymaking, et cetera, et cetera. Right? It's basically critical race theory. Is basically what it boils down to. So let's see more from Ibram X. Kendi on this question of putting together a kind of ad hoc committee to determine whether a policy that is to be pushed by a certain legislature at the state level or Congress at the federal level has a disparate impact on society.
How do we reduce this racial inequity of this wealth gap? Because inequity is the norm. And so reparations is a movement to essentially reduce that inequity. And it recognizes that racist policies, past and present, are the reason why whites have 10 times more wealth. Not because white people are better with their money, are smarter, are fiscally mature. No racial group has this sort of monopoly on supreme economic actors. And so what that means is that the cause must be racist policies. And how do we eliminate that without eliminating those policies and then closing that gap through reparations?
I'm hoping you caught all that. And again, that interview is from 2020. Right? That interview is from 2020. And mind you, Joe Biden wouldn't take office till 2021. And here you have Hank Rogers, aka Ibram X. Kendi, arguing about the need to proactively and retroactively look at the way that policies has had a disparate impact on so-called black people. Not out of the desire for an honest hunger for justice, and whether a policy explicitly was meant to benefit people of a certain hue at the expense of people of another hue. Not from a genuine desire to do that, but as a means to be able to move the goalposts as to what is and what isn't racist in order to, in a kind of sophisticated, underhanded way, push Marxism, push communism. I bid you, please go and read his books. And if you can borrow them from one of your woke friends because you don't want to pay the money, do that. Because it's important to understand what's happening in your very own country. What's happening in your very own community. Because how, do tell, does your president, number 46, Joe Biden, how is he allowed to take these ideas that are born out of the minds of Marxists and implement them into government on our watch? How is that allowed to happen? And of course, people would argue that we are a republic and we get the president we deserve. And it just so happened that at the time it was Joe Biden. And so as a result of that, he is the executive. He can implement what he wishes, sometimes with Congress's help, sometimes by executive order or executive action. And this is the way the cookie crumbles in a Western republic. Some people would argue that. But I would argue that most people had no idea that this was happening. But it happened. It did happen. And you can listen to Hank Rogers for yourself. Articulate these points. I'm going to play one more clip from Hank Rogers. And hopefully this will give you more than enough information as to what he is, who he is, and what he was trying to do. So stand by for that clip as I find it. Here it is.
All right, so let's say if USD was playing SDSU and USD was winning year in and year out. There's only two explanations as to what's happening, as to why that outcome is happening. Either it's because USD is the superior team, right? They have better players, or there is not an equality of outcome. In other words, the rules are not fair for both of those teams. And so when you have equal teams and you have unequal outcomes, what it leads people to believe is, well, are there actually equality of opportunity? And that's really what we're asking about. And so if white people and Black people and Native people and Latinx people and Asian people are equals, meaning no group is superior or inferior, then why do we have all these unequal outcomes? The policies and practices are not fair. If some believe that parents don't encourage education as much, I think it's important for those folks to realize that that's a racist idea. But if we believe that the racial groups are equals and there's not an equal outcome, then why is it an extremist idea to ask, well, what's going on that we don't have these equal outcomes between these equal groups?
Is there a way when you create policy to do a racial impact study so that policy can be evaluated for its impacts before?
Yes, there is. And just as we have a CBO in Washington, D.C. that predicts the economic sort of impact of, let's say, proposed tax bill, so too can we create like a CBO for equity to examine what type of impact any policy would have on equity, or inequity, or even not only equity or inequity, but even the way we see the world.
Okay, so you heard it there. Again, that's from 2019, 2020, before Joe Biden would take office. And you hear him arguing. You hear him advocating for exactly what would come about under Biden. The disparate impact impact analysis committee. All right. Exactly what Kendi was arguing for is what came to fruition. And guess what? Kamala Harris, however you say her name. Kamala Harris vowed to intensify what Ibram X. Kendi was trying to do. Right? Do y'all remember that? Do y'all remember that? I think I got kicked off of Facebook. Did I get kicked off of Facebook? I just got a message. Hold on one second, y'all. I don't think I'm live on Facebook anymore. I think I just got kicked off. All right, I just wrote in a chat. Wrote in the comment section on my Facebook chat to see if I'm still live. I don't know if I am, but I just got a message on my screen that was weird. So hopefully I'm still there. So where was I? Oh yeah, so Kamala Harris vowed to intensify what was done under Biden in the way of implementing not only the solutions that Hank Rogers was arguing for, but also the solutions that people like Robin DiAngelo and Ta-Nehisi Coates and a whole slew of other woke authors were advocating for. Right? And so what these authors and scholars were engaging in, understand this, people, and listen closely, lean in and listen closely. What they were arguing for was a kind of quacky, it was quacky scholarship is basically what they were arguing for. You just heard Hank Rogers say that if this college team beats that college team year in and year out, there can only be two explanations for it. Either one of the teams are superior or somebody's cheating. Right? That's what he just said. He leaves no room for any other explanation. He just gives you those two as the option. And understanding the PC climate in which we're living, the kind of sleight of hand that is built into that explanation of giving those two options is that he knows that most people are going to say, well, nobody's superior. Everybody should be equal. That's what he's banking on when he gives you those two bogus explanations. Either this group is superior or somebody's cheating. The idea is to kind of herd you in to choosing the latter. Well, there must be some unfairness going on. There must be some inequality going on. There must be something happening out there. Maybe it's the referees. Maybe it's, somebody spiked the Gatorade for the opposing team, and that's why they're losing again and again. It's something someone else is doing. It's not the team. It's not that they don't, it's not the fact that they have, coaches who are not as talented as the coaches on the winning team. It's not the fact that the players are unruly and like to cut up and they're not disciplined and, half of them miss practice. It's not that. It's somebody's cheating. Like that's the binary. And mind you, Hank Rogers is, and I made this point about another author, but Hank Rogers, he rejects the idea of binaries when it comes to so-called gender. He's of the opinion, and you can tell because he said it out of his own mouth, but you could also tell because in his little diatribe there, he refers to Hispanic people as Latinx or Latinx or however he said it, which is a very like transgender / racial kind of intersectionality term that they tried to popularize but then died in the water. So he subscribes to that ideology, that LGBT ideology, which rejects the idea of a binary when it comes to sexuality. Like he believes that there are 95 different genders. But when it comes to this, he's all about the binary. He believes that the only two options, the only two rational, explanations for as to why this group is doing better or worse than that group is because either one of the groups are superior, which we know that's not the case, or somebody's cheating. And it's obvious that somebody's cheating. You understand the argumentation here. But understand what he's doing. He's conflating race with culture. He's conflating ethnicity with culture. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. I want to show you what I'm talking about here. Wow. Sorry, bear with me one quick second. Okay. I thought I already agreed to these permissions, but whatever. Okay, so Bear with me one quick second. It's not letting me share my screen. Come on. Why is it not letting me share my screen? Okay, so for some reason it's not letting me share my screen. All right, so I just lost half of my viewers. That's weird. So not only did it let me not share my screen, it also kicked half my viewers out of the chat. I think I completely lost my Facebook page. I'm wondering if I still have the page in general, but it certainly kicked me off the live stream. So anyway, it's not the program. It's is Facebook still here? I'm not entirely sure what's going on. So it looks like it kicked me off of Instagram. Yeah, it looked like it kicked me off of Instagram. I think Facebook is still here. It kicked me off of Instagram and it kicked me off of IG as well. So copyright. Oh, okay. I guess because I'm using Jubilee's content, that's why they're flagging me. That sounds like it might be what it is actually. Folks, I'm sorry about the hiccups here. Like it won't let me share my screen, and so I think that is the issue with the platform that I'm using, which is Ecamm. And for whatever reason, I mean, it let me share my screen last time, so I'm not sure why it's not letting me share my screen. So I was talking about Hank Rogers, and I was going to share my screen with you so you can actually see what he says with respect to setting up this, first of all, setting up this kind of disparate impact committee, but also to give you more insight into his idea that there's nothing wrong with so-called black people, and that the issue is the system, the issue is society, not so-called black people. And essentially what he's doing is he's conflating ethnicity with culture, right? And he's saying that to say that a culture is, something is wrong with a certain culture in terms of the fact that it's not, promoting education amongst its youth, in terms that it's not, it doesn't do well in terms of entrepreneurship and in terms of being productive and things of this nature. To acknowledge that about a culture is, in Ibram X. Kendi's mind, racist. And for those of you who are just joining, if you notice that I'm using the name Ibram X. Kendi and Hank Rogers interchangeably, it's because it's the same person. Hank Rogers is, in fact, Ibram X. Kendi's birth name. Henry Rogers, Hank Rogers, something like that. So I'm just going to read the excerpt for you instead of projecting it onto the screen, because it's not allowing me to share my screen. It's just a black screen. And I'm doing the same exact thing. I'm very tech savvy, and I'm doing the same exact thing that I did last time when I shared things on my screen, but for some reason it's just not going. So in his book Stamped, which he released in 2020, Ibram X. Kendi says, and I quote, that a racist idea is any idea that suggests that something is wrong or right, superior or inferior, better or worse about a racial group. I'm going to read that again, and I wish I could project this on the screen, but it's not allowing me. Well, I did just figure it out. It's not allowing me to project on my screen without restarting the platform, without restarting the program that I'm using to do this live stream right now. But of course, if I did that, then I lose the entire live stream. So I don't want to do that to you all. So we're just going to have to keep going, and you're just going to have to listen rather than following along on the screen. But he says a racist idea is any idea that suggests that something is wrong or right, superior or inferior, better or worse about a racial group. Now, those last two words, racial group, he's conflating with culture. Okay? So you get the trickery that's going on here. And Hank Rogers' mind and Ibram X. Kendi's mind to say that colored people in Chicago, South Side of Chicago, don't take education as seriously as white people who live in the outskirts of Chicago. To say that is racist, according to him. Even though it's a fact, even though you're acknowledging cultural differences, according to him, it's racist. Why? Because he basically collapses all of these ideas together. That cultural patterns are indicative of the people group, and it's something that cannot be changed, nor should it be changed. And as a result of that, because a lack of a desire for education is in Ibram X. Kendi's mind kind of paramount or a kind of staple of that person's ethnic identity, rather than them having to rise to the occasion and learn to love to study, learn to pursue education, rather than the onus being put upon them to rise to the occasion. The onus is instead on society to rejigger itself to accommodate that person. Even though that person, even though that culture pulls society down, especially the more that, Trump and Biden or whomever, Republican or Democrat president, is imposing on society, look, we must push these policies to help X or Y group. So you have all these things happening at the same time. Presidents, be they Republican or Democrat, saying that we need to push policies to help the so-called blacks. You have that happening over here. And then you have, from an academic place, people like Kendi arguing that blacks shouldn't have to do anything to raise their station, to become more productive. Because, there's nothing wrong with them. And to say that there's something wrong with their culture is racist. And these two things, the legal and the academic, feed into each other, thus causing a kind of downcast on society, thus causing a kind of burden on society. And this is what happens in the Marxist framework. From each according to their ability to each according to their need. It's my responsibility and your responsibility as a productive citizen, as a taxpayer, as a law-abiding citizen, as somebody who believes that it's my responsibility to pull my own weight, who believes that, I should be able to live in a crime-free community. Therefore, we need police. Therefore, we need, to the extent that we don't have police or our town can't afford police, we need to be able to deputize qualified, competent people to keep the community safe, or whatever the case may be in a civilized society. According to people like Kendi, to say that this particular group who's committing the most crimes, there should be nothing done about them. There should be nothing done about crime, because to say that something should be done about crime is racist, according to Kendi. Right? And so, again, that worldview has made a place in our very own government. And so Trump was right to get rid of that, to get rid of this disparate impact analysis, which was born out of Marxism. Because the objective of this committee is to implement, by way of incrementalism, Marxism in the United States of America. Right? I've lost my train of thought because of the issues with not being able to project onto the screen, as well as being kicked off of certain platforms over the duration of this live stream. But hopefully I was able to bring that home and make at least some degree of sense. So I've been babbling on for too long. Let us now move on with the next clip, shall we?
That doesn't make any sense. Any policy,
It doesn't make any sense. I agree.
No, what
It's a
you're
bad
saying
idea.
does not make any sense, because the policies that are implemented,
Yes.
the majority of the ones that are in Congress are agreed upon by the House and the Senate,
Right.
Democrats and Republicans.
Yes.
And so, with that being said, there's black people represented. There's
Yes.
all kind of
Well,
people
that's the
represented
point.
in creating our laws and
I know, but
policies.
that's the point.
So,
But
what are you
not
saying that they're
everything-
not considering
But
whether or
here's-
not it has a desperate effect on
So
the black
here's the
community?
thing. When you create a policy, obviously you are creating it in good faith. But we do not know always how that policy is going to affect the
Give me an
population.
example of a
Can
policy.
I finish talking?
Give me an
please?
example of policy.
But I'm
'Cause
trying to explain
I'm
to
running
you.
out of time.
So the point of the disparate analysis report is to check to make sure that the laws that we implement in good faith don't end up hurting the black community by accident. Why would you get rid of that?
Why do you think he got rid of it,
Because
according to
he's
you?
racist.
Okay, so again, I'm hoping you heard exactly what she said, that exchange between her and Brandon, with the insight that I just laid out for you. And hopefully, for others of you, that you already knew these things, because it's as if she read Ibram X. Kendi's book right before the debate, on the way to the debate, in the Uber, having it playing on audiobook or something, because what she's saying is right out of the page of Ibram X. Kendi's books. That the only reason why Trump would get rid of this disparate impact analysis committee is because he's racist. I'll remind you the title of the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. In the conclusion of the book, implement, he calls it in the book, a anti-racist committee, right? Or Department of Anti-Racism is what he calls it. So he's advocating for the Department of Anti-Racism, which would be a function under the executive branch of the federal government. That's what he's advocating for. And it would manifest into the Disparate Impact Analysis Committee, right? And so what I was trying to say before I lost my train of thought is, and I told you to lean in, and then I did you a disservice by not actually finishing what I had you lean in for. We see this kind of quacky academia that goes on, that has ideas like the Department of Anti-Racism. And then those ideas bloom from out of the academy, from out of academia, into not only federal law, but also into common rhetoric, into common conversation, right? Because she didn't have to mention the name Ibram X. Kendi. She didn't have to mention Marxism. She didn't have to mention any of these things in order to articulate substantively what those things wish to do. And she didn't even do that. She just basically pretended as though it's an automatic good thing that such a measuring stick existed, and to begin with, without acknowledging where it came from. and the political ideology, the Marxist ideology that undergirds it. You understand? So, sorry, I had to take a water break there. But yes, I mean, these people, again, their talking points are just so predictable when you've read the material. And this is why I say, please go read them. Read Kendi, read Robin DiAngelo, read Ta-Nehisi Coates, read Kimberly Crenshaw and Martin Luther King even. I mean, he wrote a lot of Marxist rhetoric in his books. Read W.E.B. Du Bois. Read these people. So, read Lenin. How can I forget to mention Lenin? Right? Because Lenin is basically the brain trust of much of what we're seeing today. Herbert Marcuse. Like, again, they are the brain trust of exactly what this woman is talking about and what people on, many of the people on this panel are in fact talking about. But let me not dwell on that too much longer because I've been dwelling on it for quite some time. And hopefully you all will take into consideration my plea to go read these items so you're not just taking my word for it. So let us continue.
Booker T. Washington was feted by the white racist establishment. He had tea at Windsor Castle by Queen Victoria. He met Susan B. Anthony. He was allowed to create the Tuskegee Institute because he was promoting this myth of personal responsibility,
It wasn't
which
a
harms
myth.
Black people.
The most
Yes,
successful
it is.
documented Black man who lifted so many Black people from poverty to success was Booker T. Washington.
No,
The Tuskegee
no, he did not.
Institute was incredible for Black success in America.
The institutionalization of Jim Crow was a direct result of his false message.
What was his false message?
His message
Personal
was that
responsibility?
Black people were not fit to participate in the political process.
That's not true.
Because slavery had set them backwards.
Where do
and
you
so
see
all of
that
the
Booker
Black
T. Washington mentions
congressmen,
that?
it's in his book. Yes, that
Participating
is
in
the whole
No, it's
thesis of
not.
Up From Slavery.
So that's a wild mischaracterization of what Booker T. Washington was advocating for and Up From Slavery, right? And just like I told you to go read all these leftist woke books, go read Up From Slavery as well. You'll see that what that man just said is a flat out lie. And Brandon Tatum was right to call him a liar and to say that he was lying, that wasn't true. That's not what Booker T. Washington was saying. You can read in page 16 of Up From Slavery that Booker T. Washington said that slavery was as detrimental for the white man as it was for the Negro, right? So this notion that Booker T. Washington was saying solely that, Negroes were not fit to have equality or to be equal with whites in America because of slavery, that's a mischaracterization of what Booker T. Washington was actually saying. Again, page 16 of the original copy of Up From Slavery. Booker T. Washington is saying that it was as detrimental for whites as it was for Negroes, and you should read why he believes that was. Now, let me just say that I don't agree with everything Booker T. Washington ever said. For example, Booker T. Washington said that he was for universal suffrage. Now, how he thought that we should get there is indicative of what I think is proper in the civilized world, namely that, one should have to prove their competence and the fact that they are domiciled in the country in order to vote. That we shouldn't just relinquish the right to vote to every individual just because they breathe air and happen to be within the borders of the United States of America. I don't believe that for a second. And I'm not going to straw man what Booker T. Washington was advocating for as it pertains to universal suffrage, because he qualifies what he's saying. And one of the quotes that I might read this evening But yeah, when it comes to stuff like that, when it comes to a few other points for what Booker T. Washington advocated for or what have you, there's some disagreements that I have. But by and large, the man was 100% on point. Or not 100% on point. I mean, he was probably about 94, 95% there. No human is 100% there. Not even I am 100% there. And it's okay to disagree. But what that man was saying is a total mischaracterization of what Booker T. Washington was advocating for. Booker T. Washington argued on page 115 that no man who continues to add to his material, intellectual, and moral well-being will be long left without profit or reward. Right? That's what he argues on page 115. And he says that that is a great human law. That no man who strives, who adds to himself material, intellectual, and moral well-being will long be left without reward. And that is a great law of humanity. And I agree with that. I agree with that. You agree with that, whether you realize it or not. If you work for a living, right? And you happen to have somebody on your team, let's say you work construction, or let's say you have a white collar job or what have you, you're having to work in a team to get a project done. If you have somebody who's a part of your team who shows up late, who doesn't put in as much work, and then who takes credit for work that you've done, that you put your time into, that other teammates have put their time into, that person would weigh your group down. If you raise children, hopefully you raise children to teach them discipline, to teach them manners, to teach them self-respect, to teach them productivity, because those children will one day become adults. And the worst thing to have on your hands is a lazy adult child who's not interested in getting married, who's not interested in pursuing a career, who's not interested in starting a business and doing something, making something of themselves, but is bleeding you for what little money you have, especially if you're elderly and you rely on Social Security or what have you, and they're laid up in your house, spending your money, eating your food, right? You try to instill values in them in their formative years that you might equip them well enough that they might go out and be productive. I mean, this is why Booker T. Washington calls it a great human law, a great law of humanity. And you have to get back into the context of what was going on. After the ending of slavery, you had a lot of people who lived their entire lives on plantations, who didn't know what it was like to go out and buy property and pursue skill and make it on your own without having to rely on a master. Are we forgetting this? Are we forgetting this took place in history? And so what Booker T. Washington endeavored to do is to use the Tuskegee Institute to teach them not only the books, but also the art of self-reliance, the art of basically making your own way and doing your own thing and living off the land and growing your own food and building communities that not only survive but thrive. And this was actually happening in North Carolina, in Texas, in Oklahoma, in Florida, and all of these places where the Negro Business League existed, including Harlem. Without Booker T. Washington, Harlem would not be mostly colored right now. It was Philip Payton, who was a protege of Booker T. Washington, who in the early 1900s, as a realtor, set out to buy property in New York. And he went into Harlem, which at the time was a mostly white community, and he was able to acquire a building there. He moved Negroes into the building, and then he soon began to buy more and more buildings to where Harlem became mostly colored. All this happened before 1910. Right? Where I mean, you can read about it in Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, Harold Cruz, where he documents that soon white people were coming to colored people or colored real estate agents hat in hand, begging them not to evict them from their property, or evict them from their, not their property, but the homes they were renting there in Harlem. Before 1910, imagine that. A white person coming to a colored landlord, begging them not to evict them from their property. That's thanks to what Booker T. Washington was doing. Not just teaching of the books that you might become a highbrow, useless intellectual, but trying to educate the whole man. That's what he was doing there at Tuskegee. And he was being effective in doing it. And so when Booker T. Washington, and so when Brandon Tatum said that no other Negro man had as much of a positive impact in the uplift of the Negro people, Brandon is absolutely right. But of course, the colored man sitting across from Brandon Tatum says, oh, no, it's because of him that we had Jim Crow. And then he proceeds to mischaracterize what Booker T. Washington was arguing in Up From Slavery. So not only did Booker T. Washington never say that, you know, the Negro is not equal to the white man. And that's another thing. One of the things that they try to get you on is this kind of confusion of what equality actually means, right? Because they point to the Declaration of Independence and say, look, it says here that all men are created equal, but Negroes aren't treated equally. Martin Luther King himself said this during the 1963 I Have a Dream speech, March on Washington. This is where they try to get you. And then they believe that it's on them to set the standard on what equality means. And naturally, equality means redistribution of wealth, according to them. How do I know that? Because when Martin Luther King was asked by an NBC reporter while at Ebenezer Baptist Church of how the Negro, like how can the Negro get equality, King tells him that we can get it through redistribution of wealth and power. He says at a speech at Stanford University before a body of students and faculty that social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention. In other words, the only way to prevent rioting in the streets is to give the Negro social justice. What is social justice? Go back and read Vladimir Lenin, who describes social justice as the redistribution of resources, public ownership of property. Marxism. So when King tells you equality equals radical redistribution of wealth and social justice, he's telling you that Marxism is how you get equality. But that's not what the founders had in mind when they argued that all men are created equal. Of course, they were saying equal under the law, is what they were saying. Right? They were saying equal under the law, which does not automatically equal that everybody gets a right to vote. I'm actually going to be working on a project with Liam DeBoer of Liam Out Loud. Some of you may know him from IG, as well as Blender News, BLENDR, Blender News, out of Canada. And we're going to be making a series of historical videos where we basically, they're going to be mini documentaries, and there's going to be at least 10 of them, where we're going to be exploring the question of citizenship and suffrage and the Enlightenment era and so many different things, because I understand that some of what I'm saying right now probably doesn't make sense. How could you say, Chad, that equality doesn't equal universal suffrage, that equality doesn't equal that everybody get the right to vote? I want to explain all that. It's going to take some time to really flesh that out in a way that makes sense, because you're having to really undo a lot of the ways in which we've been indoctrinated under this Marxist framework. But no, equality doesn't equal universal suffrage at all. So stay tuned for that. But right now we're talking about this debate. But he being the guy sitting across from Brandon, proceeds to totally mischaracterize everything that Booker T. Washington stood for. And I'm going to play some more of those examples for you. So let's see here. See if I can find some more.
Black men any job that gave them the opportunity for social dignity, value, and worth, they were systematically denied. And a lot of it had to do with Booker T. Washington's message. Now, guess what?
Booker T. Washington's message
has been harmful.
That I have.
You have not read the book.
I've read portions of his message.
No, read the whole book.
I will read the whole book. But you cannot sit here and tell me that Booker T. Washington's message was disenfranchising to black people.
And guess what?
That's not true.
Guess what he acknowledges in his book?
So the Tuskegee Institute was detrimental to black people.
Guess what he said?
No. Was the Tuskegee
Yes, it was.
Institute
And let me tell you
detrimental to black
why.
people?
He acknowledged that
is
the
insane.
people in Tuskegee, Alabama, the white community there, only allowed him to create that institute because he assured them he would not be teaching them anything that would lift them out of domestic status, anything that pertained to higher education, any knowledge of their history, or just the humanities, anything that white people took for granted in normal universities. It was designed to keep black people oppressed.
Again, total mischaracterization of what Booker T. Washington was talking about, what he wrote in the book, and what he stood for. You'll notice that he said that, Booker T. Washington, when he was trying to build the school or take over the school there in Tuskegee, Alabama, the white community, and again, he's speaking generally here, he says the white community were upset and they were against the idea until Booker T. Washington assured them that he won't be teaching them anything worthwhile. That's a lie. That's just a flat out lie. If you open up from slavery, and again, I would project it on the screen right now, but I'm having issues with projection on the screen. But if you open up from slavery, for those of you who have a copy, please turn with me, if you will, to page 57. Beginning in the 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph, maybe? Hold on, I'm just making sure I'm on the right page. Bear with me. Am I on the... No, I'm not on the right page. Let's actually go... Come on. To page 53. Let's go to page 53. All right. Let's go to page 53. I would be reading it to you right now from my actual book, but I let somebody borrow my copy of Up From Slavery, so I'm having to read it on the digital archive here. All right, so I'll remind you while I'm trying to get this to load for some reason. Come on. All right, there you are. So I'll remind you of his claim. His claim is that Booker T. Washington was trying to set up the school until white people there around the school didn't want for Negroes to be too educated, and Booker T. Washington reassured them that he wouldn't be teaching them anything worthwhile that can help them lift themselves up. Those are the words that he used. He wouldn't be teaching them anything that would help them lift themselves up, right? So if you turn to page, let's see, 53 here. Okay, here we go. I don't know why it took me so long to find that. So page 53, beginning in the So this is chapter 13. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 1, 2, 3. So beginning the third paragraph, Booker T. Washington says, after consultation with the citizens of Tuskegee, I set July 4th, 1881 as the day for the opening of the school and the little shanty and church which had been secured for its accommodation. The white people, as well as the colored, were greatly interested in the starting of the new school. Right? So there, Booker T. Washington is speaking generally. The white people and the colored people were greatly interested in the starting of the new school. It says, and on the opening day, and on the opening day, they look forward with much interest in having a discussion. Let's see here. Why is this doing this? My screen keeps moving all over the place. Let's see. There were not a few white people in the vicinity of Tuskegee who looked with some disfavor upon the project. They questioned the value of the colored people. They questioned its value to the colored people, and had a fear that it might result in bringing about trouble between the races. Some had the feeling that in proportion as the Negro received education, in the same proportion would his value decrease as an economic factor in the state. These people feared the result of education would be the Negroes would leave the farms and that it would be difficult to secure them for domestic service. The white people who questioned the wisdom of starting the new school had in their minds pictures of what was called a quote educated Negro unquote with a high hat, imitation gold eyeglasses, a showy walk stick, kid gloves, fancy boots, and whatnot. In a word, a man who was determined to live by his wits. It was difficult for these people to see how education would produce any other kind of a colored man. So again, he's not talking about the general kind of consensus of the white people there in Tuskegee. He was talking about a small faction of them. To give you the context, right? And what he's explaining here in terms of the educated Negro, again, I have to give you the context here. This is at the time where you had the Talented 10th, where you had W.E.B. Du Bois, James Weldon Johnson, Walter White, and all the others who were really propagandizing this picture of the educated Negro, who, as Carter G. Woodson points out, I don't have the book right here right now, it's in the house, but as Carter G. Woodson points out in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, written in 1921 or 1922, said that the educated Negro, the highly educated Negro, is going off to places like Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and they are being trained to be Marxists. This is what Carter G. Woodson said. And Carter G. Woodson was no conservative. But even he acknowledged that these highly educated Negroes are being trained under the discipline of communism. He's saying this in the early 1920s. And many Southerners were aware of this, that the communists were using Negroes, specifically through education, to push a Marxist agenda. They knew that even back then. So it wasn't that white people didn't want Negroes to have education just for the sake of keeping superiority over them. They understood that, what was going on in terms of the using of the Negro to push a Marxist agenda, which Carter G. Woodson, a Negro intellectual who was not a conservative by any stretch of the imagination, admitted in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro. Carter G. Woodson, by the way, is responsible for the existence of Black History Month, which started out as Negro History Week. You don't have Black History Month without Carter G. Woodson, and even he is acknowledging that these educated Negroes, who Booker T. Washington acknowledges a small faction of whites in Alabama consider the educated Negro, even he acknowledges, Carter G. Woodson, that they're being trained under the discipline of communism. So I'm hoping I'm bringing context back to the equation. I'm hoping I'm bringing context back to the center of what actually happened historically. Because leave it to the guy who was just trying to rebuff Brandon Tatum. Leave it to our textbooks and our public schools. Leave it to our government in many respects. Nope. It was just white supremacy. That's all it was. They didn't want Negroes to be educated. End of story. Full stop. Point blank. I'm giving you dates. I'm giving you names. I'm giving you authors. I'm giving you the information that you can go back. Don't just believe me or take my word for it. Go back and read this history so you're not continually played by people who weaponize and contort and twist the narrative to push their own agenda. So again, he lied, the guy sitting across from Brandon, when he said that white people in general, because remember, he framed it as the white community didn't want Negroes to be educated. That's how he framed it. And then he lied and said that Booker T. Washington basically compromised with them and assured them that he's not going to be teaching them anything that would lift them up from their station. That's how he framed it, remember? But what actually happened? I draw your attention to page 56 of Up From Slavery, beginning in paragraph 3. Booker T. Washington writes, quote, Miss Davidson and I began consulting as to the future of the school from the first. The students were making progress and learning books and in developing their minds. The students were making progress and learning books and in developing their minds. But remember, the guy sitting across from Brandon said that Booker T. Washington assured them that, they're not going to be learning anything worthwhile that will lift them up. They're not going to be learning books. They're just going to be learning things that, made them, how did he say it? He said that they're going to be learning things that makes them continually oppressed or something, or something that oppresses them. You guys can go back and rewind the show. I'm not going to play the clip again. But he said that something about oppression, right? Booker T. Washington wanted to teach them how to be oppressed. Something. I don't know. I don't want to misrepresent what he said, like he's misrepresenting what Booker T. Washington said. But Booker T. Washington says that Miss Davidson and I began consulting as to the future of the school from the first. The students were making progress and learning books and in developing their minds. But it became apparent to us at once that if we were going to make any permanent impression upon those who had come to us for training, we must do something besides teach them mere books. We must teach them something. We must teach them the books, but we mustn't teach them mere books. We mustn't teach them just the books. We must teach them something in addition to the books. Do say more, Booker T. Washington. He goes on. The students had come from homes where they had no opportunities for lessons which could teach them how to care for their bodies. With few exceptions, the homes in Tuskegee in which the students boarded were but little improvements from those from which they had come. I'm guessing as slaves. We wanted to teach the students how to bathe, how to care for their teeth and clothing. We wanted to teach them what to eat and how to eat it properly, and how to care for their rooms. Aside from this, we wanted to give them such a practical knowledge of some industry, together with the spirit of industry, thrift, and economy, that they would be sure of knowing how to make a living after they had left us. We wanted to teach them to study actual things instead of mere books alone. So again, never in any of those pages or what I just read to you do you see Booker T. Washington coming to the white community in Tuskegee and saying, fear not, we're not going to teach the Negroes anything that elevates them. You don't see that. It's a flat out lie that he said with a bold face. right? And Brandon Tatum was right to call him out for that lie, even though Brandon hasn't read the book. Of course, Brandon knows enough to know that Booker T. Washington isn't foolish enough to make the kind of comments that this guy was saying he made. So Brandon Tatum, I keep wanting to call Brandon Tatum Booker T. Washington. So Brandon Tatum was absolutely right to say that's a lie. But let us continue. I keep saying I need a producer to help me out with this, so I'm not keeping you guys waiting. But I haven't acted on it yet, so bear with me. Bear with me. So I just played that one. All right.
Let me
was
talk.
the point.
Up from slavery, Booker T. Washington had a message of black success and personal accountability and responsibility.
And it's
he
a
did
lie.
not
And it's a
depend
lie.
on the government to do the things that black people
Yes,
could
he
already
did
do.
deny on the government.
He did not.
Yes, he
He
did.
did not make his mission and his plan to
Yes,
say
he
that
did.
black people should depend on the government.
This is the
That
lie
is a
for
lie.
everybody who is listening to me. The lie is that black people should focus solely upon family and their economic status and ignore agitations
It's
for
not
social
ignoring, it's
social
prioritizing.
equality. No,
It's
and he actually
prioritizing the
says,
family,
he actually says in that
personal
book
responsibility.
that agitations for social equality are the extremist folly because black people are not prepared to be social equals to white people. He actually says that.
That's
That has
not-
been the
that's not a
program of the
pejorative.
Republican Party ever since
First
then.
of all, that's a lie.
And now, guess what else
That's
happened?
a lie.
Again, Brandon Tatum is right to call this guy out for lying. Booker T. Washington never said that. He never said that blacks are not capable, or like however he said it. Like again, that never happened. That never happened. I direct your attention to page 98 again to rebuff what this guy is saying. 98, where you at? 98. I wish I had the book with me right now. I had to let somebody borrow it. 98. What page am I on right now? Okay, I'm on 91 right now. Okay, 91. So let's go to 98. All right, here we go. Okay, so 98 is where he's talking about suffrage, right? Because remember, we were talking about equality earlier, and what Marxists mean when they say equality versus what the founders envision when they talk about equality. Of course, they were talking about equality under the law, right? That's what they were talking about. And you see that contrary to what you've learned in your schools, that Negroes did have, in large measures, equality under the law in the South. Of course, we don't hear about that. We only hear about the instances in which, due process was not acknowledged, right? And there were some instances like that where the victim of not getting their just due process was not always Negroes. It was sometimes white people as well. And that wasn't exclusive to the South. This happened in the North in many instances as well. Why am I not seeing this? So I'm trying to find where Booker T. Washington is specifically talking about universal suffrage. So bear with me. And this is one of the points where I actually disagree with Booker T. Washington. But how he, what he says, I can actually see where he's coming from. Is it there? I had this queued up. I don't know why it's not on the screen anymore. But anyway, so the point that he was trying to make was that he doesn't believe that laws should be passed. And this is, like, I can assure you, I thought it was on page 98, but it doesn't look like it was on that specific page. And sorry for the dead air. But what Booker T. Washington was saying was that he doesn't believe that there should be laws that are adopted by states that that automatically gives incompetent white people the right to vote, right? So it wasn't a matter of just keeping the Negro from voting because he's not equal to everybody else, although that is what that man would have you believe. Because mind you, he said that Booker T. Washington didn't believe that Negroes were ready for equality. That's what he said, right? But if you read Booker T. Washington's own words, and I'm going to refresh this page because it says that it's still loading. But if you read Booker T. Washington's own words, he says that I don't believe that states should adopt laws that gives universal suffrage to incompetent white people. And I don't believe that laws should be passed that gives universal suffrage to incompetent Negroes. He says that I believe in universal suffrage as a rule. This is what Booker T. Washington says. But I believe that it should be sought through some kind of test. So he's arguing for a test that one must pass that shows them to be competent of the way that government works, shows them to be competent and literate when it comes to the ability to be productive and to take care of oneself. If a person should pass such a test, then they should be considered competent and registered to vote. But otherwise, no. He believed that this law, this practice should apply not only to Negroes, but to whites as well. So I'm hoping that makes sense. Booker T. Washington was not arguing that Negroes need to be given some time. Negroes alone need to be given some time to catch up, and because they're not equal to whites yet. Nowhere in this in Up From Slavery do you find such rhetoric. But what he is arguing is that many Negroes are incompetent and they are not basically qualified to vote in the same way that so many whites are not competent and so many whites are not qualified to vote. It was a matter of one's competency more so than their race. In fact, their race had nothing to do with it at all. So that's a more accurate explanation of what Booker T. Washington actually said and what he actually believed. But what this guy is saying is a mischaracterization of what Booker T. Washington said and believed. But again, don't take my word for it, and sure as heck don't take his word for it, but go read Up From Slavery yourself and make your own decision as to what he was saying, what this guy was saying is actually accurate or not. And I guarantee you will find that he is completely wrong. So once again, Brandon Tatum is right in calling him a liar.
Let me
was
talk.
the point.
Up From Slavery. Booker T. Washington.
I just want to focus on what.
My bad. So let us move on because we're pushing up on 2 hours if we're not already past it. I haven't been looking at the clock. So let's see. I played that one. I played that one. I played that one. Let us play this one now.
Republicans have done way more damaging things, even just
That is
as
not true. Give me an example.
Just recently with Doge, we had the highest exodus of black women in the federal workforce. I'm not sure if you're not aware of that information, but
Doge,
wait, I'm not sure if you're aware of that information,
but
but black
is cutting spending
and cutting spending for social
So
services,
you think
increasing poverty, increasing crime,
cut
increasing
spending.
death, and harming people over and over
We're
again. You are
cutting
doing
spending. No,
nothing
no, no.
to help the black community,
No,
and
you
trying to
want-
perpetuate a policy platform that insists that black people need to be put down is not
That
going
is
to
a lie.
put people forward.
That is a lie.
Absolutely
You are
not.
saying that we're going to cut government spending, but we should leave all the black people there because they're black.
No, we
If
should,
we're cutting government spending,
we should increase government spending by taxing the rich, funding our communities, and putting us in jail instead of putting people
taxing
in
the rich.
power.
All right. So they always say, like, they always tell on themselves, right? How did this go from where it started out to we need to tax the rich and we need to do this, that, and the other? Again, we need to implement Marxism because they don't actually care about the so-called race issue as much as they care about the revolution. So whether it's this guy with the striped shirt or the guy before him or the girl with the piercing, understand that this whole argument of so-called race is a proxy for what it is they really wish to implement. Tax the rich. Taxing the rich helps so-called black people, says this guy. And it's the Democrats who wants to tax the rich, and therefore the Democrat policies are better than the Republican Party or Republican policies. You understand? The arguments are always proxies for what it is they wish to really do. And so this whole thing just at the end of the day becomes a big spectacle because the young person who's watching, the Gen Zer, the Gen Alpha, the Millennial, the Zoomer, the Boomer, regardless of the generation, really, they watch this, they see these young folks up here making these arguments, making an articulate, sophisticated argument for Marxism under a different mask. And the idea is to get you to look at them as, oh, these people are noble. These people are moral. These people are really fighting the good fight. And they're taking Trump to task. And Brandon Tatum, like, he's just a sellout. He's just, he's there trying to tap dance for the white man. And he's there, just getting a paycheck or whatever the case may be. And he doesn't really care about black people like that. It's a spectacle. And I think Jubilee knows what they're doing. This is why when they put their little fact checks on the screen, you see no sources for what it is they're saying. You just see fact check at the top, whatever their claim is, and no source, no citation. You're supposed to just take their word for it because they're Jubilee. They're a polished YouTube channel or show that does all of these highly produced debates and shows and content. And so they must be right when they fact check people because they look like they have their stuff together, right? And most people, probably not most people, but many people, that's their line of thinking when it comes to the so-called Jubilee fact check. When it comes to determining whether something is legitimate or not based upon how highly produced it is, right? CNN is a very highly produced television network. They have their makeup artists, they have their high definition cameras, they have their tailors, they have the whole nine, but they'll sit there and lie to you every day. MSNBC, same way. Fox News, in many respects, same way. Just calling a spade, just because something is highly produced doesn't mean they're right. I mean, don't hear me say that you shouldn't focus on your craft. I mean, you hear me saying right now, I need a producer for this show because, like, I feel bad for you all. You have the audio issues. You have stuff not displaying on the screen when it should. You have, all the things that make this show raggedy, right? And I'm trying to do better. My My focus tends to be on film more so than live streaming, but I could stand to do better and step my game up. But this is what I'm telling you. Don't just take my word for it. Go and read the material that I'm providing you yourself, and understand and notice that I'm not just telling you to go read conservative material. Most of the books and most of the material that I told you to go read tonight comes from woke leftist types, not only living today, but people who wrote stuff as early as the early 1900s. Right? But we need to tax the rich. That'll show them. That'll bring about equity for the blacks. Okay.
Republicans have done way more damaging things, even just
That is
as
not true. Give me an example.
Just recently.
My bad. All right. So let us keep it moving. We're almost done.
Taxing the rich is a foolish statement by you. What do you mean by taxing the rich?
We in California have already seen.
That's why people are leaving California.
Oh, wait.
That's why business owners are leaving here. Companies are leaving. They're fleeing.
In California, even in the basic past, when we taxed the rich, we were able to fund the University
They
of California
leave.
systems. And what did Ronald Reagan do? Ronald Reagan said, let's slash that because black people need to suffer, communities need to go down. And what do we know? Now we have budget. Now we have budget deficits affecting our systems. We have laws from the 1970s still
Let's
on the
talk
books
about taxing the rich.
Oh, wait.
That is a lie.
We can talk about
Democrats
taxes too. Let's go.
Are still selling black folks to this day.
That
taxing the rich they're not going to change the tax code. So taxing the rich is a myth. Would you benefit more financially if you left California?
depends on how I use my money because I'm a smart person.
Only if things were to go the way you want them to go with your Marxist worldview, you won't have any money to speak of, regardless of how smart you think you are or not. And this is another thing. These people think that they're so smart. These people think they're so brilliant. They think that they have it all figured out because they went and sat through 4 years of college, right? Because they got the indoctrination. They got the so-called education. He was told that we need to tax the rich by some baby boomer professor who used to live in a commune in the 1970s, 1960s, 1970s, because they believed that the revolution was underway. So they set out to live in a commune in Vermont, only for that commune to fail after 5 months because they actually found out that from each according to their ability to each according to their need does not actually work. And there was a stench. It smelled like fecal matter in the air, and the water was dirty and the people were dirty, and those people left the commune. They decided to take jobs at the various state colleges there in California, cleaned themselves up, bought some houses in some nice suburbs, and they're teaching that same Marxist garbage to your children. That's the education that this young man got, where he was told that the way to bring about equity is to tax the rich more. And he believes it. And at the same time, he believes that he's so smart with his money that he will be able to not only survive, but thrive in a communist system. That's how this goes. It's how it's been going. And it's foolish. And Brandon Tatum is right. There's a mass exodus out of California, and there has been for a very long time. Right? I own a plumbing company. Many of our customers in recent years have been from California. And unfortunately, many of them are bringing their political worldview with them. Instead of understanding that in escaping California, they were also escaping the policies that were made manifest by their voting habits, which caused them to leave the state to begin with. They're coming to Texas. They're going to Tennessee. They're going to Florida. Right? And this is another thing about taxing the rich. As if people who are actually smart enough to accumulate millions of dollars worth of wealth for themselves are not also smart enough to move and leave the state should a state become super Marxist and decide to impose a heavy tax on its productive class, do you not think that those folks would up and leave and go to some other state that's more business friendly? Do you not think that that's what would actually happen? That is proven to be happening in California. But of course, this young man, he's smart. He's going to figure it out. And a system in a state like California where businesses are leaving right and left and left and right. And then, of course, you have inflation, which is causing goods to cost more than they did a few years ago. But he has it all figured out of how he can stay in California with no industry after a certain while, with no ability to be productive and make good money where you can afford to live there. He's smart enough to where he can figure it out and how to survive a Marxification of California. Go off, bro. If you really think you can do it, go off. All right, I'm going to play one last clip. I have several more, but we're not going to be able to get to them all tonight. Let's go into policing. Let's look at this one.
I want to hear why you think that police do more good in the black communities than harm.
Well, when you look at the functionality of law enforcement, meaning that the people who perpetuate crime in the black community are arrested by law enforcement officers, removing them from the community, removing the predators, the drug dealers, and all of that from the community, which is a good thing. And I cannot name other things that are harmful that outweigh all of the good that the police officers do.
How did the police first come about?
Be more
Slave
detailed
patrol.
than that. That's not true.
Yeah, it's
the police.
literally
That's two different functionalities. They can fact check it.
It's
There's
the
two different
origins.
functionalities.
The origins.
You're talking about slave patrols and modern day policing is completely different.
The origins of policing within the United States of America derive from the slave patrol. They still use the same badges.
That's not true.
The stars on the.
That's not true.
That's
the
fine.
functionality of slave patrols and the jurisdiction that slave patrols had versus the functionality and jurisdiction of law enforcement is completely different.
The entire premise of slave patrol. That's fine. That's fine. Listen, okay, cool.
So these people get to just sit up there and lie, make things up, regurgitate things that they've heard elsewhere. Oh, he asked the question, where did the police get their start? And then you see the woman. Because she knew what was coming. We all knew what was coming. We all knew, it's predictable. This book writes itself at this point, right? She knew that the slave patrol thing was coming up. As if there wasn't a such thing as sheriffs before what we know today as police officers. We still have sheriff's departments, but we also had night watchers, right? We also had, the town's watchers, the town's watchmen, throughout various communities in the South and in the North, who were basically the police of their day, who were tasked with keeping the riffraff down, keeping the riffraff under control as it pertains to white citizens. And of course, yes, you had the slave patrols as well. And the slave patrols was actually a function of a greater duty to, in certain jurisdictions, the greater duty of just basically keeping the riffraff down in the community at large, irrespective of who the criminal was, right? These things have existed for a long time and pre-exist the kind of window of time here in American history where the kind of slave, what's the name of that law? I forget the name of the law, where basically folks in the North were basically tasked with making the proper authorities aware when certain slaves who were wanted were caught. I forget the name of the law. Anyway, so during that window of time, the role of patrolling and keeping crime down was something that existed prior to that window of time and has long existed throughout not only the Western world, but also in many eastern parts of the world as well. So this notion and this idea that modern police got its start with slave patrols is once again a very leftist, very Marxist kind of trope that they often use, not because it's true, but because once again it coincides and aligns with Vladimir Lenin's vision of slandering anything that stands in the way of the revolution. And they see the police as an obstruction to the revolution, right? Vladimir Lenin, in his books, he wrote about the gendarmes, the political police, whose role it is to obstruct the revolution. And to the extent that you come face to face with the so-called political police, one of the ways to defeat that obstruction, one of the ways to defeat that obstacle is to slander it as a fascist, as a Nazi, as, yo, you got your start in the slave patrols, as a means of galvanizing public opinion against the police, as a means of galvanizing public opinion against those obstructors of the revolution. And we've seen this happen time and again, right? Over the course of American history. In the early 1900s, whenever communist-led unions would organize and take to the New York streets and were met with police and batons and, clubs and dogs and fire hoses even, in order that they might disperse these unruly crowds that didn't go through the proper channels of pulling their permits. Again, these were mostly white crowds that were dispersed in this way. The idea was to label that disbursement of the crowd as police brutality and to plaster as the headlines in newspapers that, a group trying to seek for workers' rights were met with police brutality. So that's how they spin the narrative. When in reality, they were doing a lot of agitating. They didn't pull the permits. They were perfectly allowed to march if they pulled their permits. We have HD, archival footage of groups that did pull permits, that were radical groups, who were perfectly able to march down the streets. You can see off to the side police just standing there as these people walk by, not posing a threat because they pulled the proper permits. But to the extent that they wanted to make a major story, the Marxists, they would strategically not pull the permits, and they would show up in bulk, and they would be met with the clubs and the hoses and the dogs, these majority white crowds, these white unions, and they would be dispersed. And then the headline in the paper the next day would be pro-workers' rights group met with police brutality. So the object of the hatred was supposed to be the police, because the police stand in the way of the revolution, according to Vladimir Lenin. Fast forward to the 1960s, where the civil rights movement would employ that same tactic that was utilized by white groups, white union groups, from the 20s to the 60s, 20s to the 50s and 60s. They would employ that same tactic. They would call it nonviolent resistance. Remember? They would call it direct action. And they learned all about direct action at the Highlander Folk School in Montreal, Tennessee, which was started by Don West and Miles Horton, both of whom were communists. You can read about Don West and Miles Horton in Robin D.G. Kelly's book, Hammer and Hoe. You can find it right now on Amazon. Go buy it. I know you don't want to put money in the pockets of Marxists, but it's important to know this stuff because this stuff is happening right now. It hasn't discontinued. It hasn't stopped. It's happening right now. 2020 George Floyd protest was an example of that. It's one of the latest iterations of it, and it will continue to happen again because it's the same playbook. That's why I say go read the playbook. Don West, Miles Horton, both of whom were communists, start the Highlander Folk School. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, John Lewis, Coretta Scott King, all of the people that you are told are heroes on Sesame Street, in grade school, in academia, All of those entities tell you that these people are heroes, got their training in a training school that was started by communists. You understand? Nonviolent direct action is what they were taught. The idea is to frame the police as obstructors of the revolution, to remove that instrument from society so that you can have your way clear to conduct your revolution. You saw it in the 1970s, after years of the Cold War, where we were in a fight against the spread of Marxism within the Western Hemisphere. We were in a fight against that, you remember. And as a means of understanding the plan to spread Marxism and to spread violence in America, it became necessary for our counterintelligence apparatuses to look into these organizations like RAM, like SES Weather Underground, like the Black Panthers, and yes, like Martin Luther King Jr. himself, to get an understanding of what they were doing, where they were getting their orders, so on and so forth. And so, remember, in Media, Pennsylvania, in the early 70s, the FBI building would get broken into by a group of young Marxist radicals. They would leak that information to the press, and then would begin, we had COINTELPRO, the American government spying on American citizens who weren't doing nothing. They were just trying to bring about freedom and equality. That's all they were doing. Never mind the fact that they were radicals. Many of them were getting their dictates from Moscow, the USSR. Never mind any of that. Never mind that the SDS were literally domestic terrorists, blowing up buildings, taking professors hostage at colleges and universities because certain professors didn't want to teach what it was that they wanted them to teach. Never mind any of that. They just want freedom. They just want equality. J. Edgar Hoover is the problem, who is the leader of the -- police agency in America, the FBI. Again, the idea is to slander the police apparatus, to see your way clear to have the revolution. The Black Panthers were singing and chanting throughout the 70s, the revolution has come. It's time to pick up a gun. The revolution has come. It's time to pick up a gun. And then, of course, in the 80s, the late Jesse Jackson marching down Stanford University campus with students behind him as his backdrop, chanting, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go." Western Civ, of course, being Western civilization. "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go." They were advocating for the kind of implementation of so-called Black Studies classes at our colleges and universities, which had at its undergird Marxism, Marxist ideas that were pushed by the likes of Herbert Marcuse and Angela Davis, who's teaching in those colleges today. So the objective, I'm going to keep coming back to this, is to get rid of the police as an obstacle to the revolution. This is why it's necessary to slander them as fascists, to slander them as racists, to slander them as Nazis, to slander them as having their start with the slave patrols, when in fact that's not the truth. That's not the case. That's not the case at all. Can't even talk right now. And don't hear me saying that the police are 100% right all the time, because of course there's nuance to everything, right? Because the police, just like any kind of law enforcement body or military body or whomever, can be ordered to do something that they shouldn't do in the civilized world, right? Depending on who the mayor is or the police chief is or the colonel or whatever the case may be. And of course, you take an oath to uphold and to defend the Constitution. But at the end of the day, we're dealing with human beings. And so what if the chief in question and those who are under his order believe that defending the Constitution means doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Going after people for not wearing a mask. Right? We see all the time when it comes to like custody battles and things of this nature. And the taking children away from people, from the more competent parent. And the laws are such to where you can't do anything about it. The police are just doing their jobs. But again, the police, even in those contexts, is not the problem. It's the law that's the problem. And it's those who are pushing the law that's the problem. Right? So what I'm trying to say here is that the institution of policing is necessary, but it could always also be used for something negative. And this is why, once again, it's important to understand the laws that are on the books. It's important to make sure that those who are in office, who are responsible for making the laws, are competent, do love this country, are believers in Christ, right? Because we know that the acknowledgement of God's law, the acknowledgement that God is the author of good, is the pretext for governing well. I believe that to the bottom of my soul, right? But the institution of policing is necessary in the civilized world. But these people don't believe that. They believe that the existence of the police is an obstruction to the revolution. That is why they make these arguments. It's Vladimir Lenin 101. You can read his book, Where Do We Go From, or not Where Do We Go From Here? It's What Is to Be Done. Where Do We Go From Here is Martin Luther King's book. But read What Is to Be Done, and you can hear all about Vladimir Lenin's views on the police and how they are an obstruction to the revolution. And to the extent that you read that, you begin to understand why there are modern efforts. Of course, the modern efforts, they're going to call it criminal justice reform. But you see modern efforts to decriminalize crimes, to get rid of prisons, to defund the police, on and on I can go. It all stems from the basic premise that Vladimir Lenin put forth, that the police are an obstruction to the revolution. You understand? Do I have time to get into one more clip? I know I've been going, wow, almost 2.5 hours. I may as well at this point, right? Let's play another one.
What do you think Black people were doing post-slavery?
Well, I think there's a period of time where there was an explosion of Black excellence.
Yes, Reconstruction.
After slavery was abolished.
Right.
We have Black people fighting in the military, Black people owning their own companies,
yes,
building wealth. We have Black Wall Street.
Okay.
We have, you go on, so on and so forth.
Right.
And I believe that as Black people begin to support Marxist theology, Martin Luther King and others put us in a path where we rely on the government more than our own resilience.
Okay.
And you cannot tell me that that's not true.
So let's pause, because we just skipped like a good 30 years of history. We just skipped like 3 decades of history.
I'm giving you a summation from the 30s to the 60s.
Okay, yeah. So we did Reconstruction, and Reconstruction was ended, right? Because the South took back. At the time, we had Northerners in the South who were running the South so that the Union could stay together. Once the North left the South, Reconstruction ends, and that's when we see Black people start to decline.
I mean, these people, I wonder if they really believe the things that they say. First of all, the notion that any positive that came to the Negro was thanks to, Northern carpetbaggers is a flat out historical lie. That's number one. And this, again, is well documented, even by W.E.B. Du Bois. Even he acknowledges the progress that was made in the South, even after the North wasn't there anymore. Even he acknowledges it. Of course, you can read Booker T. Washington's My Larger Education. That's something I bring up often on this channel, where he actually talks about a lot of the progress that was being made in the South. And Booker T. Washington, mind you, was a well-traveled man. You can read George Schuyler, who at first was a socialist until he saw what socialism was. until he saw what communism was. He was a writer for the Pittsburgh Courier. And George Schuyler was very critical of the South until he visited the South in the 1920s. He visited North Carolina and South Carolina and all these places. And he saw the progress that was made not off the back of political agitation and what the NAACP and all these other losers were doing, but off the back of the kinds of things that were advocated for by Booker T. Washington himself. Of being a person who's rooted in biblical values and merit and pursuit of industry and productivity, and being a woman of honor, a man of virtue. These things were manifesting, not in the new age way that y'all use manifesting today, but in the practical sense, manifesting genuine creature comforts for Negroes in the South. Thomas Sowell has documented the upward mobility that Negroes experienced since the 1880s up until the 1950s. Progress that was being made in the South. Walter E. Williams has documented this. I have documented this. This is well documented. So for her to sit up there and say that, oh, Reconstruction, you saw how she threw that word in? Because Brandon said, well, after slavery, yeah, there was success in among Negroes. She just throws in Reconstruction. Again, giving the North credit for things that were being done in the South by Southerners. Not by Northerners, but by Southerners. Of course, she doesn't want to talk about the fact that these same Northerners, many of them, who were implementing so-called Reconstruction, were at the same time sexually assaulting. Let's just use that word. So for fear of being flagged on this platform, many of the women who they would come into contact with, the widows of former Confederate soldiers, of fallen Confederate soldiers, who were plundering their properties and land and taking valuable silverware and things of this nature. The carpetbaggers were doing that in many instances. Again, you don't have to take my word for it. Go read the history. And so life was hell, not only for white people, but for also many Negroes during Reconstruction. But that's not the way it's framed today. That's not the way it's framed in our history books and by our ideologically driven historians. Now, I know some of y'all are saying, well, Chad, you're kind of on the deep end now. You're saying things that ought not be said, because that's certainly that's certainly not what we were taught in grade school. That's certainly not what we were taught in academia. But don't take my word for it. Go read the history. Please, for the love of God, go read the history. Because what you're being told is a lie, or at the very least, a bending of the truth to push a narrative. I'm going to play one last clip before I get to these super chats. Because there's a plethora of them, and I think Brandon did really well. We're going to play one last clip.
You think that Karl Marx was worse for the black community than Jim Crow segregation?
Let me argue this point. Capitalism has rescued and made successful so many people of different backgrounds and demographics. That's why America is so great. What I'm saying is that black people being resilient, operating through capitalism, and believing in themselves and being self-sustainable was the best path for blacks, and they were successful in that. When they begin to rely on the government, begin to rely on handouts, begin to listen to foolish things that people like Martin Luther King said, it caused us to be more dependent on the government, less dependent on ourselves, and now you see decline in multifaceted areas.
Okay,
consistent, let me say, I'm gonna let you speak,
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that when you look at other groups, minority groups, they did not fall for that. You look at the Jewish population, look at immigrants that came over here, they were self-sustainable, they worked within their community, they built wealth, generational wealth amongst each other. They did not form out their existence to the government.
Can I speak now, please? Thank you. So The other immigrant groups that you're talking about, first of all, were not subject to Jim Crow segregation laws. But do you? I just want you to answer.
Jews were subject to Jim Crow laws.
I just want you to answer this question, yes or no. Okay. Do you think that Karl Marx hurt the black community and his ideology hurt the black community more than Jim Crow segregation?
I have to think that through. Jim Crow segregation.
What is there to think about?
Because you're
By the
acting.
way, Karl Marx is white, so that would still be a white person hurting the black community. Just saying.
But then Martin Luther King embraced his theology.
Okay, but so,
which is a black man leading the black community off a cliff.
I don't disagree with anything Brandon Tatum said there at all. And the antics that these people use with the laughing and the scoffing and all the things. I guess that's the way that these people get their point across these days, right? I mean, if you watch even debates like televised debates and discussions where people disagree, even back then in the 1960s, 1950s, you didn't have all this comical like theatrics and trying to make the other person look dumb and all that. Yes, you had that in some contexts, but it wasn't as prevalent as you see it today, right? You wouldn't really see that become a kind of a staple in public discourse, at least televised public discourse, until the 1960s, where you had these young college students who were arguing with professors, with pastors, with other people representing other entities. They were having conversations, and the college students who were themselves radical tried to basically make out their opponent to look like a fool. And so the college students would laugh at basic points that were made by the other side that were solid points, that were reasonable points. They would laugh as though it's the silliest thing they heard in the world, right? And so you would see this carry through on into today with this Jubilee nonsense. And it distracts from the substance of the conversation that's being had, and it's meant to communicate to the viewer that what this person is saying is silly. Look, he's a spectacle, and a lot of people fall for it, unfortunately. So it's a mode of communication in the same way that very words coming out of your mouth are a mode of communication, right? It's a social cue, as it were. So enough about analyzing that aspect of it. Brandon Tatum was right in pointing out how Marxism was in fact detrimental to many so-called black people. And he was also right in saying that other groups were kept out of certain spaces. If you read the signs in some of these places back then during segregation, it's like colored. And colored meant a whole bevy of different things, not just so-called blacks, but also meant Italians, Jews, other groups as well. Mexicans, Asians. It wasn't just the blacks that were kept out of certain spaces. And Brandon is also correct in saying that, when it comes to this kind of pushing of Marxism among the so-called blacks, you had Martin Luther King, who was in many respects at the head of that, who led the so-called blacks off a cliff. I mean, this is a fact. What was the equivalent of Martin Luther King amongst the Jews? What was the equivalent of Martin Luther King amongst the Mexicans and the Asians and so on and so forth? And you can probably name some names, but they weren't as prominent and as talked about and as celebrated as Martin Luther King. And so there's no question that when it comes to race Marxism in the United States, no group has been as focused on, has been as invested in by Marxists than the so-called blacks. No other group. We have laws, we have legislation, we have policies, we have holidays, we have so many different things that are meant to cater to the so-called blacks as a result of the efforts put forth by the Marxists. And so the question becomes, are the blacks better off for it? And the objective, reasonable answer is no. And so to the question of which was worse for the so-called blacks, Jim Crow or Marxism, the answer is resoundingly Marxism. Why? Because even under Jim Crow, the Negro was thriving. I've interviewed so many elderly colored people who told me that in school, when the schools were segregated, they got the optimal education, and that many of their peers grew up to be professional people, grew up to be dentists, doctors, attorneys, foremen and construction outfits, and so on and so forth. This was the case. You had high expectations. You had things that were expected of you in these segregated schools. Manning Johnson also talks about this in his farewell address that you can actually find on YouTube. He actually talks about it in Color Communism and Common Sense as well. Where even in the segregated context, you had this kind of upward mobility that was taking place. And I've shared in some of my own documentaries and docuseries where Negroes in the 50s were asked how they feel about segregation. And the consensus among many of them was, it doesn't affect me at all. I still have a quality job. I have a family. I do my thing. After work, I go here. I hang out with these people. Like, I'm perfectly fine. My dentist is here. My doctor is here. My milkman is here. What more could I ask for? Now, that's not advocating that, legal segregation is a good thing. Legal segregation is the way it should be. The government should be all up in our business like that. That's not what I'm advocating. But I acknowledge the wisdom in the aftermath of the war between the states. I acknowledge why it was necessary to implement this in order to try to keep the tension down, at least to some degree, with the thinking that over time, these racial barriers, or whatever you want to call them, this legal segregation will be lifted and die of natural causes, which was happening. Again, this is acknowledged by Manning Johnson, who makes it clear that it was not just whites imposing segregation on the Negroes. It was Negroes and whites agreeing to implement these segregation policies with the objective over time, once again, that these laws, these separations, they will fade. During the what do you call it? Help me out here. Rosa Parks, the Montgomery bus boycott, right? They specifically sought out James Blake's bus because they knew that he was one of the few bus drivers, the few white bus drivers there in Montgomery, Alabama, who would actually implement the rule which dictated what a Negro must do if a white person wishes to take their seat, so on and so forth. Even though those laws were on the books in Montgomery, they weren't very implemented like that. So that's why they sought out James Blake's bus, even though Rosa Parks' family had a car, even though, it wasn't that widely implemented. They specifically sought out his bus, not just to get rid of the law, but once again, and we make this point clear in the MLK Project, the objective was to expand the federal government's jurisdiction into transportation, for one, but then two, it was to be a kind of case study for larger direct action campaigns with the Marxist agenda in America. This is at the time the Montgomery bus boycott, where Martin Luther King and Stanley Levison would basically solidify their partnership, where King was to be the kind of subject or the mentee of Stanley Levison, who was a seasoned communist advisor and fundraiser who worked with Paul Robeson prior to linking up with King, who worked, even though he was an atheist, Stanley Levison, who worked with a Anglican church or a religious magazine called The Churchman, right? He was an editor for The Churchman, even though he himself was an atheist, because he understood as early as the 1930s, when the communists implemented their plan to infiltrate seminaries, to infiltrate churches under Earl Browder, who was then the leader of the Communist Party in the 1930s. So Stanley Levison comes out of that school of thought, comes out of that tradition, comes out of that order by the Communist Party to infiltrate the church. And he proceeds to work with the churchmen before linking up with King in 1957 during the Montgomery bus boycott, and would continue to work with King well into after he was dead, continuing to help fund the family and fund Coretta Scott King in particular, who was going around the country continuing this legacy of the sophisticated, underhanded pushing of Marxism amongst the blacks. All of this is well documented, right? So when you ask the question, which was more detrimental to the blacks, was it Marxism or was it Jim Crow? I already established that blacks were actually thriving even under Jim Crow. But what about Marxism? Drive through any urban center throughout the country, and you tell me how Marxism is working out. Like, you tell me. You heard one of the people say in the clips that I played earlier, the guy who was basically lying on Booker T. Washington. What did he say? He said that it is harmful to the black community to tell them to have self-responsibility. That's what he said, which coincides with the Marxist worldview, that personal responsibility is not going to solve anything. Redistribution of wealth and collective ownership of property, that's going to solve everything. That's what Marxists believe. So they look down their noses at the concept of personal responsibility. They have no room for it. They actually have contempt for it. Right? So when you tell a whole race of people that you are not to be personally responsible, but instead, if you come along with us, as Herbert Marcuse argued, that the ghetto people must do, the blacks must do, if you come along with us and join our fight, join our revolution, then you will get your liberation. When you tell people that for decades, do you think those people will be productive to your society, productive to civilization? Absolutely not. So when we see the disparity when it comes to crime, and the fact that the blacks commit more crime per capita than any other ethnic group in this country, when you see the frivolousness, the deficiency in test scores, the deficiency in graduation rates, the infantilization that goes on in the music. They call the BET Music Awards culture's biggest night. And when you look on the stage, all you see is twerking, devil worshiping nonsense. But they call that the culture's biggest night, black culture's biggest night. Yes, Marxism has had a far more detrimental impact on the so-called black community than Jim Crow. Like, what are we talking about? You understand? Okay, so I'm pushing up on 3 hours now. Thank y'all for continuing to watch for this long. I'm going to get into the super chats, and then we are going to call it a night. All right, so we got some super chats. Sorry I saved this for the end. I should have been reading them throughout, but we're going to get through all of these. All right, so we got our first one from Chris Creative. Says black people always crying about not being accepted and do everything in their power to stay separate. Yeah, that's true. I would love a politician running to say I'm not catering to any group. We are all Americans. 100%. 100%. I'm not interested in learning what Trump specifically is doing specifically for the blacks, or what this politician is specifically doing for this or that group. Like, no. Don't even start down that road, because to the extent that you do, you're going to open up a can of worms, and then you have every group coming to you saying, well, what about us? And what about our oppression? Or what about this thing that happened to my ancestors, and so on and so forth? It becomes insufferable after a certain point. We got one from Will. I'm not sure how to say that last name. It says, I prefer all my reparations to go to Chad and Blanche, but not a penny to whiny Marxists like Ibram X. Here's some funding for your tireless work, Chad. Thank you. Thank you for the $10 super. Really appreciate it. We got one from Pepe. Did nothing wrong. Says Animal Farm on a loop. Yeah, that's basically what that was. We got one from Anthony LeBlanc. Super sticker, thank you. Really appreciate it. We got one from Pepe Didn't Do Nothing Wrong. Chad, you are like Paul Harvey, the rest of the story. Thank you. Appreciate it. We got one from Mauricio, 91. Says that Marx, communists, and I guess he meant to say Marxist, communists, and Democrats have nothing but the same word games and manipulation tactics from the Garden of Eden. Yeah, that's pretty much, yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. Mauricio, 91 again. I'm starting to think that my allies actually hate me for lying to me literally all of my life. It's like seeing in color for the first time. Yeah. I mean, and that's a very disheartening conclusion to come to, or realization, I should say, to come to, that these people who present themselves to you as allies, who present themselves to you as like, oh, I'm just here to help and I'm on your side and I'm a champion for the fill in the blank, the Negro, the gays, the lesbians, whatever. And you realize that they are basically lying to you about history, lying to you about policy, lying to you about everything, so that they can push an agenda that would result for them, and for them, what is tantamount to a power grab. So in other words, they're using you to get what they want in terms of power. It's very disheartening, but if you're someone like me, you get your revenge by making documentaries exposing them. You could do it in other ways too. You don't have to make a documentary, but there are other ways of exposing what's really going on. We got another super chat. Let's see. Is useful idiots too harsh or appropriate? I guess you're responding to. Yeah. Wait. Okay. The way that it's presented on the screen, like for what you guys see, is different than what I'm seeing on my screen. So I didn't realize that you were actually. Okay. Never mind. Senior moment here. Pepe didn't do nothing wrong. Said, is useful idiots too harsh of a word, or is it appropriate? I would say that it is accurate, because that's the word that they came up with, actually. That's the word that Marxists came up with. So yeah, it's absolutely useful. Oh, really? Says, would love to see Chuck Littleton do a Jubilee. LOL. That would actually be good. I'm actually trying to get Chuck on a, like, not something that I'm hosting, but something that someone else is hosting, where it's basically like a surrounded debate. They're trying to get me to do it, but I said that Chuck would be a better fit for it. So hopefully they take me up on that, but we'll see. Melissa says, we all appreciate you. Thank you for your time. Thank you. I really appreciate you. We have Keisha King. Hello, Keisha. How are you? How's the family? How are your girls? How's everybody doing? Hope you're doing well. If you're not following Keisha King, go follow her at Keisha King. great content. She's been on basically she's been on a how should I put it? She's been killing it lately. Basically doing these debates with these people over blackness and the black church and all these different things. And she's been killing it. So do go follow Keisha King if you don't already. She says they can't imagine that free market is better than Marxism, even though they thrive in a free market system. Keep going and keep hope alive, Chad. Thank you. Keep hope alive is crazy. What is that, Jesse Jackson? Keep hope alive. All right. Thank you, Keisha. Appreciate it. Alethea left me a super sticker. Thank you. And we got one more from Pepe. Didn't do nothing. Thank you for all the super chats, Pepe. Really appreciate it. Remember what Reagan said, the most horrific words from the government is, I am here from the government and I'm here to help. This is true. Reagan was certainly right about that. Well, listen, folks, thank y'all for being here this evening. Thank y'all for the super chats. Thank y'all for listening to me ramble. Do go back and watch the Jubilee debate that Brandon Tatum did. I think he held his own pretty well. And, you know, I think also it's necessary to go back and read some of the material that I recommended tonight, because it will certainly give you sharper insight into a lot of what's going on. And not only that, a lot of where these people are arguing from. And it's necessary to know where they're arguing from so you can know how to expose it. We got one from Psalms 37 verse 71, says, hey Chad, it seems that what you are saying is so hard for others to comprehend. They refuse to see truth because to them it is not. Because to them, yeah, it's not. Spiritual warfare. Oh, to them it's not spiritual warfare. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you, Psalms 37 verse 41. I appreciate it. And I think you're right. I think that's, I think you hit the nail on the head with that comment. And it's unfortunate, but all you can do really is pray for folks and pray for yourself too, because we don't get it. I don't get everything. I'm not omniscient or all-knowing. I still have a lot of deficiencies and still have a lot to learn. But you know, wisdom begins with fear of the Lord. And a lot of these people don't have any fear of the Lord at all. You heard the guy say earlier that he bragged about how smart he is, right? He said something foolish and then followed it with, he's smart. So we're dealing with hubris and pride. But we all have to humble ourselves before the Lord, or we will be humbled, right? So again, I thank you all for watching tonight. I thank you for entertaining what I had to say. And if you disagree with what I had to say, that's okay. That's fine. It's okay to disagree. I'm not sure entirely what was going on in the comment section, whether you guys kept it amicable or whether you were trying to tear each other apart. But if it was the latter, remember that your battle is not against flesh and blood. So, as difficult as it may be, Jesus Christ, our Lord, looking upon the crowd, had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And that's difficult to do sometimes. Like, I couldn't imagine being Brandon sitting across from those 20 people, lying, slandering, mischaracterizing, and then laughing and scoffing, right? To try to be like Christ and look at these people and to have compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd is difficult to do. But my prayer is that that we will have faith strong enough to do that. Because folks, like, these people need Christ too, right? In the same way that it's a miracle that you're born again, my prayer is that they will miraculously be born again as well. And I mean that genuinely. So anyway, I love you all. God bless and good night.